you very much. Everybody can hear me without the microphone? Okay. So let's say I was only helping the organizers, and this will give me the opportunity to thank the organizers for this conference and for letting me be a part of it. And I will begin. So sometime in the last quarter of the 12th century, the Mukadam of Kayub, which we heard about yesterday from Amir, wrote a short note to the head of the Jews, Sar Shalom Alevi, in the Egyptian capital. The note dealt with a girl named Amai, probably a prospective bride, and her situation or status. You can read here. As for the status of Amai Ibnat Abul Hassan, the sister of Khalaf the freedman's wife, she came to Kayub, she and her mother and her sister and her sister's husband and their children, and they stayed in Kayub for a while. Then after that, her mother died, and they both buried her in Kayub in the presence of a group of people from Israel who reside in Kayub. Then after that, her brother took her to El Manufia and left the community of Israel, Yatzam Miklal Israel. And the servant is, so we have here co-serving as well. And the servant is not aware in the matter of the Seder Mayim of any impediment or bond, not according to the authorities, and not according to the law. This interesting short note brings a host of fascinating questions regarding marriages, local and regional communal organization, linguistics, and so on. If we focus our attention on religious conversion and communal boundaries, the subject of my talk, we can raise a number of related issues. First, conversion and family. What does it mean her brother took her and left the community? Did he expect that she will convert with him? Did she convert with him? Can we assume that it wasn't a coincidence, that it happened only after the mother had died? And where did the brother come from anyway, all of a sudden? Another issue is conversion and migration. Can we assume that the families moved to Kayub, from where we don't know, and their probable lack of connections there made them more vulnerable to conversion? Did the brother think that it would be easier to convert in a different locality, in Manufia? And what facilitated the knowledge of the Mukadam of Kayub about the conversion that took place in El Manufia? And where was Amayim while this letter was written? In Kayub, back in Kayub, still in El Manufia, maybe in the capital. Another issue is conversion and nomenclature. The brother is said to leave the community, Yatzam Miklal Israel. It's a description found only from Genizah period onward, as far as I am aware. Why not using Meshumad, Poshea, etc.? The brother-in-law of Amayim is a manumitted slave, so technically he's a proselyte, he's a ger. But he's not called a ger, he's called Meshuchar. And all manumitted slaves that we know of, except one, are not called gerim, called Meshuchar, Meshucheret, and so on. So what does it teach us about Genizah society's attitude towards manumitted slaves? Taken together, we have here 2 or 3 converts. The manumitted slave who became Jewish, married a Jewish woman, had children with her, and became part of her family and her tribulations. The brother who apostatized, and to which religion he converted, we do not know. And perhaps also Amayim herself. Otherwise, why did her brother take her with him? And what did she do in a different town with no parents and with only one converted brother to lean on? And if Amayim did convert out of Judaism, this means that she definitely converted back to Judaism. Otherwise, the Mukadam would not say that there is no impediment on her marriage. So maybe we have here even 4 different cases of movements between religious definitions. Now, the question of religious conversion and the boundaries of the Jewish community is just one aspect of much larger debate on the nature of Jewish existence in Muslim lands in the classical Genizah period. We all know the ever-present question of how Mediterranean and how representative Genizah society or Genizah documents are. And we have different aspects of this issue dealt with by different scholars. Many of them sit in this room. For example, how much can we learn about general commerce from the document of the merchants of the Genizah? What can we learn about the religious identity of the Jewish merchants themselves? Who were their ashabuna and who are not our friends, our colleagues? How much did they cooperate with non-Jews? How did they preserve their identity also in their mercantile activity? Another issue is the relations between Mabbanites and Karaites. How easy was it to shift loyalties from one community to another? Are we talking about different communities at all? What about the different differentiations between Babylonians and Palestinians, between Europeans and Arabic-speaking Jews? Other issues, for example, the use of non-Jewish legal venues by Jews, was talked about it briefly today, by the common people, by communal leaders, and by the Jewish courts themselves, or the reliance of individuals and institutions on close ties with the government, and what are the implications of these phenomena on our understanding of the Jewish so-called autonomy in the Middle Ages. So all these are very interesting questions, but in the next few minutes I will focus, as I said, on religious conversion in Genizah society, an issue which I believe is not yet thoroughly understood. Goitein dedicated a mere 10 pages to a condensed discussion of conversion to Judaism and from it in his Mediterranean society, though he stressed that, quote, new material is cropping up all the time, and the entire question needs to be studied in a wider context. While in the decades to come, he and others have dedicated articles and segments of studies to certain aspects of conversion, it seems that there is still more to be done in this field. And first of all, to systematically document, analyze, and compare all cases, all known cases of conversion in the various directions that we find in Genizah documents, and see what can they tell us about social reality, communal boundaries, and religious identity in Genizah society. So this is what I'm trying to do in the last couple of years, with the help of many of the people in this room, and I would like to share with you some of my results and thoughts and speculations. So a point to be regarded in regard to conversion to Judaism is its legality. Although many times in scholarly literature it seems taken for granted that conversion to religions other than Islam was forbidden, such conversion is allowed in 3 out of the 4 Sunni madahib, and was not forbidden also among the Fatimids. Apparently also in practice, conversion between minority religions did happen under Islam, and it is also documented in Cairo Genizah, in Genizah records. Consider, for example, the proselyte Mevorach, who converted in the court of Menachem ben Yitzhak ben Sasson, no family connection, who resided in Cairo in the early 13th century, or the anonymous woman who wrote to the Nagid from Itfir wishing to convert to Judaism. This means that aside from the few famous proselytes who hailed from Christian Europe and found their way to Muslim lands and to the Genizah, not all proselytes in the Genizah are necessarily Europeans. More importantly, it says something about the resilience and self-assurance of the Jewish and Christian communities in medieval Islam. While proselytizing amongst the Muslims could have dire consequences, other minority religion communities were a potential resource for new converts. And when a person did convert, it was a case for boasting and celebration, or for disputations and conspiracies. Think, for example, of the convert in the document from early 11th century published by Norman Gold more than half a century ago. It talks about a Christian who decided to become Jewish, hid in this Jewish synagogue in Damascus, debated with Christians, suffered harassments from members of his family and community, and proudly rejected bribes. Or consider, on the other hand, the boasting of several Coptic compositions from the 13th century celebrating the conversion to Copticism of a Jewish dignitary named Abu Fakhr ibn al-Azhar Messani, who is also said to have polemicized with Jews both orally and in epistles, and what you see on the left are the epistles that you have in a manuscript in Paris. So the possibility to recruit new and enthusiastic members and to publicly boast about it was of much importance to members and leaders of religious minority groups. It should be taken into account when discussing the situation of Jewish and Christian communities under Islam. And this is a perfect session to talk about implications of Jewish-Christian polemic under Islam. A second point I would like to draw attention to is the legal and social status of manumitted slaves in Genizah society, like Khalaf, the manumitted slave, Amayim's brother-in-law. Recently, Craig Perry has completed a dissertation discussing the lives of slaves according to Genizah documents, and there is much to learn from it about slaves' origins, lives, and possibilities. And I have benefited a lot from Perry's work, and I focus my attention in a subject which is a little bit later. It's not the lives of slaves, it's what happened to the slaves after they are manumitted, when they are no longer slaves, but what are they? Are they Jews, proselytes, ex-slaves, Mawali? It's not clear. One fine example to the controversies in the Jewish community about this issue and the personal stories behind it is this genealogical list, published long ago by Mordechai Friedman, in which Abu al-Ma'ani ben Khalaf al-Levi al-Dajaji is said to have 2 wives. You see in the marker, you can't see the marker, but you see third line from below. Shivcha Meshucharet is his first wife, anonymous freed slave woman who bore him anonymous girl and boy. And his second wife is his Levite cousin, and she bore him also a son, and he is mentioned by name. And Goiten has already pointed to the peculiar disregard of the first son's disregard of the first son's name. And I here follow Friedman's suggested explanation that the compiler of this list was somewhat reluctant regarding the acceptance of freed slaves, or at least this specific freed slave. He was not the only one suspicious of female slaves, especially if they were married to their former owners, a phenomenon that we see in Genizah quite a lot. I was lucky enough to identify in Cambridge that one of the bills of manumission mentioned in scholarly literature is probably a bill of manumission by the same person, by the same merchant. Here is the bill. You cannot see much, but thanks to the Friedberg project, we can play with it a little bit. And the owner who manumitted the slave is Abu al-Ma'ali, compared to Abu al-Ma'ali, al-Levi al-Tajir ben Khalaf al-Dajaji. And the name of the manumitted female slave is Sa'ada. Could it be the anonymous freed slave who became the wife and the mother of the anonymous son? Chronologically, it is reasonable. Interestingly enough, the backside of the same bill of manumission contains not only the signed testimony that the bill was indeed handed to Sa'ada the manumitted for her to keep, as we find in a few other bills, but it also details her ritual immersion in the mikveh. In the mikveh of the Babylonian synagogue in Fustat, as well as the required recitation of basic commandments, do's and don'ts, punishment and reward. This description is, as far as I'm aware, the only description in the Genizah of immersion of a slave, manumitted was not, and the most specific eyewitness description of an actual dated conversion to Judaism in the Middle Ages, Genizah or not Genizah, as far as I'm aware. It seems then that someone went out of his way to show that the manumitted Sa'ada became genuinely and thoroughly Jewish, a real Ger Tzedek. So the two documents then, which probably relate to the same person, demonstrate different attitudes towards manumitted slaves, from demarcation and repudiation to inclusion. These competing trends are visible also in the letter from Kadu. Consider why Khalaf had to be identified as a manumitted slave in the first place. Why not proselyte, or why not just Khalaf? And Genizah documents always they reveal that manumitted was an efficient and enduring identifier for ex-slaves, even decades after manumission, and even in the lives of the manumitted person's children. So for many decades after supposed integration into Jewish society. The third and last point is apostasy, pishut, conversion from Judaism to another religion. Probably the most surprising find for me was the high number of cases where it is not even clear if or when someone had converted at all. In fact, about a third of all Genizah documents which mention pishut or poshea actually discuss disputed or possible apostasies, accusations of apostasy and counter-accusations, threats to convert, and even confessions about, some self-confessions about thoughts of possible conversion. If you look at just one example that I like, during the conflict over the leadership of the Palestinian community in Fustat in the middle of the 11th century, after Ephraim Shmaya passed away, the Rav Yehuda ben Yosef was accused of apostasy before he immigrated to Egypt. Fasha Abi Sham, and then Yatahawada in Egypt. This we learn from a letter of his supporters. One of the accusers, it seems, was Surur ibn Sabra, one of the dignitaries of the Jewish community. So in retaliation, an anonymous writer accused Surur that he, Hadal Mal'un, had apostatized while in the Maghreb, and he even married a Jewish woman there, but from a low status, because everybody considered him fashi, like Poshea in an Arabic form. So again, you see the intersection of migration, conversion, and family relations. When we add these documents of attested or possible apostasy to Genizah documents which deal with the possibility of return of apostates or apostates' children, or to other evidences of uncertain identity, the social picture that we get is surprisingly rich and fractured. So, to conclude, what can we say at this point about religious conversion and the social boundaries of Genizah society? First of all, we can say that the boundaries were relatively fragile, permeable, and penetrable. Now, this is not to say that they were not important. On the contrary, people accused one another of conversion and threatened to convert and tried to ostracize members of their community whose conversion was suspected. But all this could happen only in a society and environment in which the act of conversion and the public demonstration of religious identity were not necessarily clear-cut. Now, the permeability of the social boundaries is demonstrated also in the high number of ways in which these boundaries could be crossed in the different directions. At first glance, one might think that there were two main ways to cross the boundaries of Genizah society. Inward, as European converts to Judaism who fled to Muslim land, and outward as local Jews who converted to the ruling Muslim religion and never saw their former co-religionists unless for purposes of polemics or abuse. But in closer look, one discovers the many paths that crisscross the terrain between the Jewish community and its surroundings. So we have converts to Judaism who could come from Christian Europe or from the local Christian and Muslim communities. We have a different and distinct path to Judaism as through slavery. This meant the conversion to Judaism of Christian slaves, either from Byzantium as war captives, or from Africa, or the conversion to Judaism of pagan slaves from Africa or from India. In the other direction, outwards, Jews could and did convert to other religions, but not necessarily to Islam. Others could threat or contemplate conversion, while still others could convert but then revert. And to add to that, the conversion of slaves to Islam, and the reversion to Judaism of forced converts, and the possible reversion to Judaism of second-generation converts, and the social boundaries can be seen less like a rigid border and more like a no man's land, which is rich with colorful characters, so to speak. So crossing the boundary was not without consequences, but not unheard of, and not necessarily irreversible. And of course, I don't need to stress here the importance of such claim, if not to say conclusion, but claim, to discussions about excommunication, about appealing to other courts, non-Jewish courts, etc. So much more can be done regarding these and related issues. For me personally, the study of social boundaries and their crossing points to several possible directions of inquiry in the future. For just two examples concerning intra-Jewish identity, one might think of migration. What entitles one to the title stranger, Navi? If he comes from a different polity, if he comes from a different religious civilization, from different language, is a Jewish immigrant from Persia less of a stranger, of a foreigner than a Rumi Jew from Byzantium? are all Rumi Jews the same, or there's a difference between a Jew from Byzantium or from Provence or from Iberia? And how can a stranger become one of us, and even a communal leader, as we know that it didn't happen? Concerning interreligious contacts, the close and continuous relations between converts and their Jewish families and communities after conversion should be seen in light of the daily contacts between Jews and non-Jews in general. So two possible directions to begin such an investigation, which I find interesting, are food, and specifically ritual meat slaughter, and dwellings. So two examples of material culture. Of course, Goiten has the basic, the infrastructure laid for us, but there's still more to be done. One may think of a study similar to what Tamer Elaiti has done concerning one residential house in Cairo and the changing identity of its owners and inhabitants along several generations. Can something similar be done using Genizah documents, which will teach us more about the details of one shared court or one neighborhood along a few years and the effects of conversion on dwelling patterns, or vice versa, dwelling patterns on conversion, and religious versus economical segregation? And regarding food, we have David Nierberg's study on the theological and social meanings of meat slaughter and consumption between Jews, Christians, and Muslims in Christian Spain. What can be learned about religious identity from a systematic Genizah study on food production and consumption and the control over meat supply? And in what ways did it matter where and with whom did one eat? And just to conclude with the taste of another Genizah document which takes these two questions into account, this testimony was published in Indian book number 4. And this is a testimony of a group of people in Aden, including some of them are foreigners, and they are complaining against a person who stood at the synagogue and besmeared, quote, every foreigner, every dog, every dyer, and people without dignity who do not enter the houses of the townspeople or the synagogue, while in Egypt they eat in the houses of the Samaritans and the Karaites and the Hurasim, the preparers of minced meat dishes. So what is so condemnable with these minced meat dishes preparers, and why are they equated to Karaites and Samaritans, and what should be done with people who eat their food? All these may be interesting questions for a future human study. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the wonderful material. You have questions, and please.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Can you go back to the slide with the Bibliothèque Nationale manuscript? So I'm interested in that guy, the Abu Fakhr. So because in Copto Arabic literature, he pops up all the time. So we know his name. He's always brought as an expert in the Torah. So he probably mentioned it and I skipped it. But what do you know about him? Have you identified him? Where did he live?
Yeah, so, okay. This one here is from the History of the Patriarchs, but there is another. First of all, I would like to hear about every mentioning of him that you know of. And I found recently another mentioning of him in the composition called, nicknamed the Abu Saleh, the Armeni Chronicle, but it's the wrong name, but it's 13th century, and there they say the exact date, the day and month and the year and the church where he was baptized. So it's the second half, it's like the 1150s or so, and when he was consecrated as deacon in the 80s or so. So this.
Yeah, I think I have one. You have identified him.
No, of course. Why should I? No, unfortunately, no.
Can I have a remark? First, it was a very good paper, like you always deliver. And now, regarding the immersion of the freed slave in a mikveh, there was no mikveh in Cairo or elsewhere. We don't know of any mikveh, so it must have be a different kind of immersion, like the Karite or other method.
Yes, you're perfectly right. I shouldn't say mikveh. It says only atbad nahar.
Yeah,
or maybe it says so where it's stored.
But
But
it's
yes,
not in the Nile.
she was immersed, but it doesn't say
in the Kanisa.
in the Kanisa.
The Kanisa is a bedding.
What?
The bedding is of the Kanisa, no? The bedding, what bedding?
Belika.
Bedding of the
Bedding.
no, unbedding. Unbedding. But which bedding?
Do you see my marker? Anu Bedin, Fi, I don't know. בכניסה אל-עיראקיים תיבנה ותיכונן. And the word for that is Bal Yaham. This is what I was able to decide.
כן, אבל זה לא מקווה, אז זהו.
I may have missed this, but in the first case pertaining to the apostate sister, what is the impediment there?
No, there's no impediment.
Obviously, what is the alleged impediment?
I don't know, that's an interesting question. Is it like, it's not, I mean, how do you translate the alaka? Is like bond? But they mean,
bond or connection.
yeah. So is it like she's not married to someone, or is it there's nothing chaining her from being wed? And maybe one
Given
of
the
things
fact, given the fact that her brother,
that her brother converted in a different locality, and we
but
don't know
note
how
the
to compare.
fact, note the fact. This is a total hypothesis, but that the father is not mentioned. There is no father.
Yeah.
Someone needs to wed the girl,
Mm-hmm.
and according to certain schools, Islamic law, brother can also wed his sister. And note the fact that there is no impediment both according to what I forget the
The
exact,
Sultana or Bishara.
but that of the Muslims and ours, right? There are two legal
Maybe.
systems
Yeah.
for her marriage. There is no impediment for that. Okay? So it could be that the question at the background here is who can marry her, given the fact that her brother apostatized. Can he, as a Muslim, still marry his sister? This is a question that shows up in a diverse way in Hanbali material, at least, of whether a Muslim girl can be wed by her non-Muslim or father or non-Muslim brother. Okay, just something.
This may be the mirror case.
I'm not sure. Now, another question that I don't know about this Coptic guy that is mentioned, but it really reminds of the story mentioned about Yaqub ibn Kilis. Mark, you remember that you mentioned, who's also in the history of the patriarchs polemicizing against the Copts, right? How is he mentioned there? Do you remember?
No, yes, he disputes with the Rabbinites were Mukhali for.
Okay, so not against the Copt.
Not against?
The Copt.
There's another hagiography, it's not in the history of the Patras. There's like hagiographic composition that you wrote about, where there they say how he, although he converted, he still polemicized with one of the Christian Coptic priests, but of course the Christian won. But I think in the history of the Patriarch it's very neutral.
And last question there, please.
Hi, you may find this an economist statistical question. I'm just wondering, since you mentioned manumitted slaves as an object of your interest, is it possible for you to say what percentage of the conversions that you're finding to Judaism are manumitted slaves? Is it the overwhelming majority?
Yeah, it's a bit problematic percentage. You should know.
Yes.
But I have more names of manumitted slaves than of like regular proselytes. But this is because we have bills of manumission. Okay? So I cannot say. But let's say documents mentioning ger, yoret, gera, and documents mentioning ma'atuk, etc. are more or less even. 70 something and 70 something. So that's a I think good proportion. I mean, not to be ignored, is what I would say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.